Welcome to another episode of Through the Eyes of Survivors. This is a podcast that is designed to raise awareness about domestic violence and other related issues. We're hoping that our topics inspire you to seek help or advocacy and that they bring some kind of awareness within your life as to what you can do to help with domestic violence issues in your own communities. So today we have a very special guest. We have Torey Ivanic. She is an outreach and education coordinator at Summit Advocates, joining the team in August of 2023. With a deep passion for preventing sexual assault and violence, Torey's advocacy is rooted in her own personal story, which she shared in her memoir. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Biology at Ohio State University. Go Buckeyes, hey. And a Master in Physical Assistant Studies from Arizona School of Health and Sciences. Torey brings over 10 years of experience in family practice and homeopathy, offering a holistic approach to care. She focuses on building collaborations to support survivors and prioritizing education and prevention efforts. And in her spare time, she enjoys yoga, rock climbing, and telemark skiing? Oh, we'll have to find out about that. And other outdoor activities. So thank you, Torey, for being here with us.
Yes, thank you, Tara, for having me. I appreciate it.
Wonderful. So Torey, I always love to start the podcast with who we have on sharing their story some and why they began this kind of work. Give our listeners a background on yourself.
Um, yes, why I'm in this kind of work starts when I was a kid. And, I wrote a whole book about it. So I could tell this story in hours or I can tell it in like 5 minutes. And so I'm going to do the 5 minute version. So I was a gymnast from the time I was almost 3 years old, and I worked my way up to a pretty high level team. But my coach was a sexual predator, and he spent probably about 2 to 3 years grooming me. But during that time, I knew he was actually involved with one of my teammates. So one of my teammates had told me, "Hey, watch out for him. He's in a relationship." I'm not sure the words we would have used at that age,
Right.
but with one of my teammates, and so I knew about it before my actual teammate that was involved with him then told me about it personally. We were close friends by that time. And, when you get to high level gymnastics, there's not very many kids left, right? As you get older, they fall away. And so there were probably only 6 or 8 of us on that upper level team, and she and I had become pretty close. And so I knew what was going on. I went to his wedding with her. He got married to one of the other coaches at the gym and even had a child by the time he looped me into the abuse. And so it was spring of my sophomore year in high school, and I was competing and had a really bad day, and he kissed me when I was, upset. And then he sort of, it happened a few other times, mostly just kissing, but then we spent the night, the two of us then spent the night at his house one night, and that got a little bit more intense. Um, and then he moved away. And so he moved away to go to chiropractic college, and I was confused, felt awful, felt like I cheated on my first boyfriend, felt like I betrayed my friend, felt like I was part of an adulterous relationship because he was married at the time, he had a child. All of it in my 15-year-old brain was very confusing, painful, horrible. And at the same time, I wanted to understand it. And so I wrote him letters, and he actually wrote me back and explained, like, I kissed you. And then at the bottom of that letter wrote, like, destroy this incriminating evidence, and then signed his name, though, And so thankfully, I held on to those letters. There were three pretty incriminating letters that I hung on to for 15 years. So, a lot happened, but fast forward to I'm 30. I'm a physician assistant at that time. I'm hearing other people's stories, and the amount of times people would tell me, like, I've never told anyone this, but, and then they had some kind of a sex assault from when they were a child, and it was still impacting them. And I still couldn't see myself truly as a victim, but I called off an engagement and I started going to counseling. And I took those letters to my therapist, and he said, I need to make a like a CPS report. And so that was like one of my first aha moments, like, oh my gosh, really? Like I just couldn't see myself outside of my own, lenses. So during that same time, I had not spoken to my friend who was the other victim in 12 years. We had run into each other in college, and she just had a full on meltdown. And I thought to myself, I'm not good for her. I can't be around her. It's bad for her to be my friend. So we didn't talk for 12 years. And then when I started seeing the counselor, I reached out to her and I said, "Hi, I have a house and a dog and a good job. How are you?" And she replied like, "Huh, I have a house and a dog and a good job too. I'm okay. But then I sort of unleashed on her and was like, "But I can't have a functional relationship." And I just called off my engagement and just sort of like went. And in that email, I also said, "Have you ever seen a counselor? Have you ever gone through any work around what happened with our coach?" And she had not at that stage. And around that same time, by this time, he was both a chiropractor and a physician assistant. And he was moving back to our hometown area. And so that for me was really not okay. I did not want gymnasts from our old gym going to see him as patients because I figured that he set himself up for that position to have access. And so I talked to my friend and I convinced her that it was time to go make a police report. And so in 2000, so this all happened in 1992-ish. In 2006, I flew back to Ohio and made a police report. And she came with me and we both wrote out our report about what had happened 15 years prior. And then it sort of, well, I did a tapped phone call to him on which he admitted to 8 or 9 counts of oral sex with her. So that was huge. Like we had that recorded through the police tap, all the things. And I had the letters I had given to the police, and then our test, like our report. So the prosecuting attorney was on maternity leave though. And so they waited. They just kind of let it sit because it was a 15-year-old case. They weren't convinced, that they were just going to go arrest this upstanding citizen, right? But about 6 months later, someone from his chiropractic office came forward and made a report about him. And so that sort of blew it open. And he got arrested after kind of being interviewed about that case. They told him, well, what about these 2 girls? And he admitted, yes, whatever they said is true. So that was the spring of 2007. And, my co victim and I were both sort of like, okay, now what? And so a full year went by, and they told us multiple times, like, oh, he's probably going to take a plea. You're probably never going to have to do anything. Oh, wait, you're going to have to go to court. It's going to be next Tuesday. Oh, wait, never mind. It's been postponed. And I mean, it was just this roller coaster of like, what is happening?
Mhm.
Um, at one point, he was offered a plea deal of 4 years in prison and 15 years as a registered sex offender. By this time, I think at least 5 other women had come forward from his chiropractic office, and they thought they had enough that they cut the case off at that. Like they didn't take every single person coming in and making complaints. They took the people that were most, you know, likely to like prosecute, I guess, because this was like a state versus, case. It was not a civil case. Long story short, we ended up going to a 5-day long jury trial because he wouldn't take a plea deal. And he was found not guilty on more counts than he was found guilty on, but he ended up with 43 years in prison.
Yes.
Yes. And so, at the time, so that was 2008 that he went to prison. And I still felt very like I didn't talk about it with people. We didn't let anybody take pictures of us or use our names in the paper or anything like that. It wasn't something I was proud of per se,
Right.
but I knew it was the right thing for sure. And the re-victimization that went on, like even through the news, like so the newspaper put an article when he first got arrested. And I think there were like 18 pages of comments with things like 15-year-old sluts then, 30-year-old sluts now that want money.
Oh,
Things like
yes. I've seen that.
so,
Mhm.
right. So I mean, and at the time too, I mean, it was kind of like I was re-traumatized, but I was also fascinated by the sociology of all of this, right? Like the way that society was viewing us and viewing him and assuming his innocence and assuming that we were lying. Like the majority of the people that commented on that article were in his favor. And then every once in a while, some anonymous post would come in and it would be like, those girls are telling the truth because he did it to me too, you know? And so it was just really interesting. And I didn't ever have a lens into that world other than my own story, right? So then, there's some really amazing pieces to our story where both my teammate and I essentially met our husbands when we reunited. So I introduced her to a friend of mine from college, and she ended up married to him within less than a year. And I met my husband right before we went back to the police. So we've both been happily married for more than 15 years now. We both have two children. Our kids are doing great. Our marriages are great. And like about 2015, um, I was in California and I was going to a church, and the worship leader at that church got arrested on very similar acts. And it just ripped the band-aid off for me. And what that did for me is I just started talking about my own story more. I just started telling people, like, hey, this happened to me too. And it was like same age. He was 30, the girls were teenagers, position of authority, trusted adult, all the things were very, very parallel. And so that's what really led to me writing the book, because I was like, wow, like we put we put our perpetrator in jail and saved, hopefully future abuse. And that is not the typical story that comes out of a sex assault case, right?
Right.
So I thought, like if I'm ever going to write a book, this isn't the story I thought I'd be writing, but it's a very powerful story and it's a hopeful story. And
Mhm.
so I started writing the book in November of 2016 and then really like dove into it in the spring of 2017, which if you would remember, that was when the Larry Nassar case came out.
Yes, very much so. Yes.
So I'm writing this story about gymnastics and sexual assault. And every time I get in the car and turn on NPR, they're talking about gymnastics and sexual assault. And it was just like riding this wave of like really incestuous, bad stuff going on in our society. Um, under everybody's noses, right? So I finished the book. I published it in 2018, and I just didn't, I sort of fell flat. Like I didn't really know how to get myself out there talking about it. I didn't want my whole life to be about sexual assault prevention necessarily. I didn't think that's what I wanted.
Right.
But I had my homeopathic practice. I still had two kids and a lot going on. And so I really just sort of shelved it for a bit. I took speaking engagements if and when they came to me, but I didn't really want to like pursue a whole career around it necessarily. Then COVID happened, and my family and I opted out of COVID, and we sort of just went and traveled for 3 years. We did a whole year in an RV, and then we lived on a boat for almost a year. And then we landed back in a town that I really love in Colorado. And ironically, I went to church one day and some advocates came and spoke, and I went and talked to the woman who was working there, and I said, do you have any positions available? And there was a part-time outreach and education coordinator. And I was like, that I could do. It would be a way to integrate into this new community. It's something I feel really passionate about. And so I applied for it. And when they offered the position, they had gotten grant funding for it to become a full-time position. And again, I was a little bit hesitant, like, I don't know if I want to do this full time. But I mean, it's so ironic, right? I titled the book No Big Deal, From Athlete to Advocate. And now I am an advocate.
Right.
And so it's been really great because I use my personal story as the why of why I'm in this position, why I think we need to change the things we need to change. And, I can, and I can talk about it, and there's a lot of people, I know so many people who have a story like this cannot talk about it at all. And so because I can talk about it, I feel like I have to, like this is one of those things that I can't not do. And so that's why I am where I am.
Well, I commend you. You've got an
Thank
incredible
you.
story. Even just the condensed version is very,
A
incredible.
lot.
It's a
Yeah.
lot to take in. Yeah. I know you spoke some about some of what came to light for you that was very eye-opening was how people defended them versus, everybody who supported you. I experienced some of that as well in my daughter's court case and stuff when we were going through that, and it was death penalty case and everything. And people don't realize, or maybe they do, um, how much they are actually affecting the people who are we're watching. Victims are watching these stories. They're watching to see what's going to happen. So we keep a focus on, news articles and things like that are going on. And then we read the comments. And I don't think people reflect on the fact that what you're saying is going directly to the victims and how it affects them.
Yeah. I mean, it's really painful to me to see our society almost like, from my perspective, it's almost always like I get innocent until proven guilty. That is fair. And when someone is proven guilty and then they get a slap on the wrist, like the Brock Turner case is a good example of something that really just, those types of things can just shut me down because I'm like, no one even cares about this topic. And the amount of times when I'm in an audience and kind of speaking to this topic that people express the concern of, oh, what about, false accusations? And the statistics are there, like 90% or more are, you need to believe the survivor. Like the false accusations are so minimal that we have to err on the side of believing survivors. Our topic is way more stigmatized, I think, than any topic that's left out there, right? I think that like suicide prevention and mental health has been destigmatized so that we as a society can talk about it and can think about it, can understand that it's a normal type of, condition. But sex assault and domestic violence are still very much under the rug, very much taboo to talk about, even though 1 in 3 women will experience domestic violence in her lifetime. And it's not that much lower for men, And so this is a huge topic. And I feel like it's very, very taboo to talk about it still. So, and I do think it's because of the re-victimization of victims. When someone sees their friend go forward and make a police report about a rape and nothing comes of it,
Right.
are they going to go make a police report about their rape? No. If you look at the statistics on how long rape kits sit around, how long it takes to process them, as a survivor, by 6 months after, you do not want to talk about it anymore. If you go to the police and you go get your FNE, and then they say, well, we'll have results in 6 months that corroborates or not, it's not in the victim's favor at all.
No. Well, then the system rigs it too to where if you don't have any kind of physical evidence or anything, they really just don't even want to touch it.
Right.
Especially when it comes to minors, they want to automatically act like minors are lying, or they're too young to understand, or they're saying things that are put in their heads. And so without evidence, they tend to dismiss all of it like
Yeah.
it never happened.
Yeah. I mean, we are so lucky with my case that I held on to those letters and that he was, somewhat honest at the beginning, at least. But, one of the things that I do in my work right now is I have a proactive parenting workshop that I do that is
Mhm.
basically teaching parents how to raise children who would at least be able to report it if a sexual assault happened, right? For so long, we didn't really talk about private parts and name them what they're really called. And, if we don't talk to children as they're growing up about why it's not okay to look at pictures of naked people on their phones and why it's not okay to let people take pictures of them when they're naked, and we're not really open about this stuff, that's when kids don't know what to do with it. If they don't know what to call the parts and pieces, if they
Mhm.
don't know what to, say when, like, if it's someone they know and trust, which 90% of the perpetrators are someone the child knows and trusts, right?
Right.
If they don't know how to tell you something uncomfortable happened with Uncle Tony or whoever, how would they ever, like if they can't tell their parents, and most don't, right? Like most kids don't tell their parents, but they might tell a teacher or they might tell a coach. So I
Right.
think they need three trusted adults that know each other and keep an eye on each other.
Mhm.
Because if it's just one trusted adult, that it's extremely easy to groom a child.
Right. Absolutely. Because some things people will dismiss. I mean, so let's go back to like you as the example, right? The first thing was a kiss. Most people are going to dismiss that. Nobody's going to tell that child, oh, that was not right. Or the child will even rationalize as to, oh, it's no big deal. It's just a kiss. Right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so it starts like that. But
Yes.
where it ends is another matter. And we're not educating our children or even adults that no, this is the big red flag. This is where it starts. And you have to stop it there.
Yeah. Well, and what I talk about a lot now is just boundary setting, right? So I did some work in the middle school about just like by middle school age, you've got kids that still look like children and you've got kids that look like full adults, right? And it's this
Right.
spectrum. And when you're, as a teacher, hugging students and you're not giving verbal consent or asking for verbal consent for hugging, that's a boundary that I think our teachers need to set, right? The way that my coach groomed me started with talking, started with, we were in gymnastics, right? So he was touching my body a lot, but then talking about my body, talking about my physical appearance. If someone tells you a story about a sexual activity and they're in a position of authority, like that's not okay, because that's one of the things that he would do is tell stories about him and like another partner, and then he'd use a keyword, and then he would just throw that keyword out like a little inside joke. And I would know that he was talking about sex, but nobody around me would know that.
Right.
Um, there's a lot of things that we really can do as a society if we want to stop this statistic, if we want to drop that rate. We have ways to do that. And we have to be able to be comfortable talking about why. Why are we asking teachers not to follow kids social media? Why are we asking coaches never to ride this chairlift just with one student, right? Like
Right.
you should not have one-on-one access to children in any position of authority because it allows for grooming.
Well, and parents too. I mean, don't
Yes.
allow your teachers or coaches to do private lessons. You don't allow. There's certain XYZs that are big red flags that I have seen through the years growing up. Even when I was in school, particular teachers would do private tutoring in private scenarios, and then before you
Yeah.
know it, you're hearing about something going on with that teacher and that student.
Yes.
And as kid, I remember I had a friend that happened, and I remember as a teenager, I was very unprepared of what to say, what to do. I knew it was wrong, but I didn't know what to say to her or what to tell her or tell her where to go or what to do. And she was very infatuated to a point of she didn't see where it was anything wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I mean, it was fairly glorified when you look back at like movies from the 80s, right? Ghostbusters, classic teen
Mhm.
or like movie from 84, I think it came out. And the opening scene is a professor hitting on his student. and it was cool. It was totally cool that she was going to go out with her hot professor or whatever. And those were the societal messages that I was getting as a kid watching things like that. And if you look back at 80s movies, I mean, there's a lot of really horrific stuff in there. And I wish I could say like it's a lot better. I think it's mostly just gone a little bit further under the rug. It used to be blatantly okay to be sexist and racist. Now it's not as blatantly okay, but it's just shoved further under the rug where you have to kind of peel back the layers of the onions to see it clearly. But it is very much still there. And so when I watch movies with my kids, I try to watch anything that's like PG-13 or above, watch it with them so that I can be like, and that's inappropriate. And why is that inappropriate? And I just sort of narrate the movie with them. And they're pretty good at being like, I know you can't do that anymore, or whatever. But I don't feel like, there was a really good thing about parents not being helicopter parents in the 80s. But with the societal messaging we were getting as children, that was not so good. And again, I don't think it's that much better. Now we add in social media and instant messaging and all these things that predators can totally weasel their way into a kid's psyche. And we as parents have enough on our plates than, trying to police our kids' phones all the time. But it is absolutely imperative that
Yes.
that we are looking at what they're looking at.
Yeah,
So
even gaming. People come in
yes,
and they do the stuff. I'm amazed on the back doors that they can come in through, just kids playing a game online. And people are just very much unaware of what
yeah,
adults are doing in those spaces with children. So,
yes.
well, I admire the work you're doing and everything that you've been,
Thank
been through, especially. So, what would you say has been like the biggest struggles through this whole thing that you've had to overcome, maybe with the system?
I still feel like I'm trying to figure the system out. Now that I'm in a community-based advocacy center, I have seen much more clearly the struggle, which is that being a nonprofit and having to sort of fight tooth and nail just to get funding. So, for example, our organization is now only 5 employees, and two of them are direct services. And so to be able to provide the crisis intervention that we need to provide takes a lot. We run a 24/7 crisis line. So 5 employees taking call at least, 6 or 7 days a month almost. But then the prevention work that I think we need to be doing so that the crisis intervention stuff isn't the same 10 or 20 years from now. This organization's been around since 1979 doing exactly the same work essentially, right? I mean, we're doing more. We have a shelter now. There's a lot that we're doing. And wouldn't it be great if now we didn't need us? Like if we started
Right.
in 1979 and 40 years later, they don't need you anymore, right? But no, it's the same, if not worse. There's more and more and more numbers. And so when I took this job, like I really was adamant about I want to do the upstream prevention work. I want to talk to the parents. I want to talk to the students. I want to just talk to people about this topic and how we can prevent it. So one of the things that I've found that I really would love to implement in our county is Green Dot, which is a bystander intervention community curriculum. It takes a lot of the community coming together to do that training and then be willing to go out and train community members and getting people to buy in to do free work, essentially, right,
Yeah.
is not easy. But I mean, I do think that that is the most upstream we can get is to change the societal norms, to make it unacceptable to tell a sexist joke in line at the grocery store and have people laugh about it. Like instead of that happening, people laughing about it, I want our community to be someone steps in and says, we don't talk like that in this community. We don't say things like that. So, I have high hopes for that. And I know it's a long process in the nonprofit world. It's not something that you can just jump in and change the whole system. But ideally, I would have a pack or, you know, 20 or some volunteers that were all willing to do this work too. But with COVID, I think like everything kind of tanked as far as volunteering. And so we
Oh,
really
yeah.
build all this back up and get people on board that this is important work. I mean, it's definitely, I've had my frustrations, but in the grand scheme of things, I feel like the team we have right now and the work that we're doing is extremely impactful. And if we can continue to have some stability there and then build a group of volunteers out from it, I think that we can do really amazing things.
Oh, I know. I think the work of advocacy has so much changed, even in the 12 years that I've been doing it. And it changing with the times is not really happening. So, certain areas, I think that's part of why the numbers keep getting higher and higher, is we're not appealing and changing with the times in order to get the message out, to get the advocacy work out, to um, communicate something better. And then we experience the same thing here, of course, having people who are really that kind of goal oriented, who want to volunteer, who have the time to volunteer,
Mhm.
who, and yet there's more people who need these services than ever.
Right. And if you're busy, supporting victims and survivors who need crisis intervention, you don't have time to do the upstream preventative work. But the way that I was introduced to your organization was through the Breckenridge Film Festival. And
Yes.
it was such a great experience. So they had three films that were touching on domestic violence and sex assault, actually, in the film festival this year. And so they asked me to facilitate a panel, and I so wish we would have recorded that conversation because it was organic and it was really amazing. One of the directors was a male and the other two were female. And all of their insights into why they did these movies were so great and so like hopeful. Like they did it for a reason. They were very careful with what they showed and what they didn't show and why they did that. I really was impressed by all the directors' thoughtfulness around the topic. And it just became this really organic conversation that we probably could have kept going for hours.
Right.
And so I do think that there's film and there's music and there's ways that we can get these messages out where people might start to hear it differently. And so I just really do hope that is a part of every advocacy, organization's mission, is not just the crisis intervention, but the prevention and the talking about it and the bigger picture stuff. Even a lot of our education was mostly on like red flags and things, which is good. You want to see it right at the beginning, but if we're not even teaching kids, boundaries and prevention and consent, then, by the time someone gets to a relationship that has red flags, it might be a little too late. And so really raising our youth to understand body autonomy and, no means no, and all the things that go with that.
Yeah, I'm so proud of what this organization is doing to connect with that kind of community of filmmakers, because we've been doing a lot of that here lately,
Nice.
to get that kind of messaging out. Yeah, there's some really great people out there who are doing the hard work out there, and it's little known because it's not Hollywood. Right.
Right.
It's not going to be
Yeah.
Hollywood who brings this to light. It's going to be the little everyday, smaller groups who want to actually tell a story, share a story, and put a light on something that you aren't normally going to see through Hollywood. So I think for us as an organization, it has been really good to connect with these smaller film groups throughout,
Yeah.
not just this country. We got one in England too that we've connected with. So
Great.
I think it's important to shed that
Yes.
light. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Something new that the younger generations connect with more.
Yeah.
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 So, in wrapping up here, is there anything else that you would just like to share with our audience? Some words of wisdom for people who may be in a similar situation?
Yeah. Wow. Well, if you're a parent, I think it's really important to know what your kids are up to on their devices for sure. I mean, I think that's my biggest fear right now is I see my daughter, I see my son, I see them out and about and doing the things they do, but once they're in that little phone, I don't know what's going on in there all the time, and I cannot possibly monitor them 24/7. So just having the conversations of, hey, if anyone ever reaches out to you and you don't know who they are, never share your name, never share where you live, all those types of things that I know all parents know this, but I don't think all parents are as repetitive about it as they need to be. Reiterating time and time again, it's never okay to give out your real name and phone number. It's never okay to send pictures. It's never, if you receive a picture, please bring it to me. You're not in trouble. You didn't send it. It's fine. We just need to talk about it. Sexting and vaping, that's what the poor SROs at our school are like. I just deal with sexting and vaping all day long, And so these kids, it's normal, it's natural for them to be curious. And pornography is not the best way to learn about sex, right? Like we need, as a society, to be just repetitive about over and over again. Not okay to send pictures, not okay to take pictures, not okay to look at naked pictures. That's not how we learn about sex, and things such as that with our children. And just really educate yourself. There's a ton of information out there in the web. Look for the good stuff, the prevention stuff, not the scary, deep dive, dark stories, but the prevention stuff. Like, what are the best ways to teach your kids about consent? What are the best ways to set a boundary? Those two simple things can go a long way.
Yes, I agree. Especially with the pornography. I think young people, especially, yes, you are watching the act, right? You are seeing that, but that's not really what it's
Right.
like in real relationships. It does not look like that. That is not how it goes,
Yeah.
So they get in their brains, this is what it is, and you should
Right.
be, yes, and it's not. It's
So,
nothing like that.
yeah,
So
I have an analogy for my kids. This is what I tell them. I'm like, okay, so if you thought that walking out into the real world was going to be like a Marvel movie, that's
mhm.
the same as if you think sex is going to be like pornography. So
Right.
don't think that that's what it's really going to look like. And Marvel movies are kind of fun and good, right? But I want them to understand that there is an evil in it too. Almost all pornography has at least degradation of women, if not
Yes,
physical abuse of women. Um, and so like it is pushing that whole gender inequality thing even further. So we
exactly.
really do need our kids to think of porn as not as addictive and like smoking or vaping or drinking alcohol. It's not good for you.
Yeah, and parents just have to definitely, and I understand, because as a parent, I was once a parent of, I'm a survivor of abuse. My children saw it. We really don't need to talk about it. They understand, and they understood, but there needed to be a whole lot more conversation. There needed to be a whole lot more of me being very involved in what was happening. And so I love to encourage parents all the time. It's not about that you've had that conversation over and over again. Kids will have different questions at different stages. So the
Yes.
conversation has to be continuous so that you can adjust the conversation with their mindset and their
Yes.
maturity.
Yes.
So absolutely talk with your kids.
Yes. More talking is better than less talking for sure.
Absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
thank you, Tori, so much for being on the podcast. It was great to talk to you and hear your stories.
I very much appreciate being here, Tara. Yeah, I thank you for this opportunity.
All right, wonderful. Well, that concludes this episode of Through the Eyes of Survivors. Please be sure to comment, like, and share the podcast, and join us next time for our next episode, and join our Facebook group. We're also have a website. Look us up at www.breakthesilencedv.org and give us a donation. Also, check out Tori's book again. Give us the book title one more time, and we'll have that in the link, in a link as well.
Yeah, it's called No Big Deal.
No
Um,
big deal.
so if you go on Amazon and just type in No Big Deal Torey, Torey, it'll come up. Yeah.
Wonderful. All right. So thank you,
Yeah.
and we'll see you next time.